This hearing is called to order. Welcome. Free speech is foundational to our Constitution. The First Amendment in the Bill of Rights begins by protecting our rights to free speech, and our democratic processes depend upon robust free speech. Speech with which we agree and speech with which we disagree. The marketplace of ideas. Since the beginning of journalism, there has been bias in the media. From the first journalist carving on stone tablets, media bias and bias of human beings has been a fact of life. But today we face an altogether different threat. The power of big tech is something that William Randolph Hearst, at the height of yellow journalism, could not have imagined. In particular, what makes the threat of political censorship so problematic is the lack of transparency, the invisibility, the ability for a handful of giant tech companies to decide if a particular speaker is disfavored, that he or she may speak and their words simply fade into the ether, that no one hears what they say and nobody knows that no one hears what they say. Not only does big tech have the power to silence voices with which they disagree, but big tech likewise has the power to collate a person's feed so that they only receive the news that comports with their own political agenda. Polling shows roughly 70% of Americans receive their political news from social media. That power is enormous. And I will tell you, in traveling the state of Texas and traveling the country, over and over again, I've heard from Americans concerned about a consistent pattern of political bias and censorship on the part of big tech. Big tech enjoys a special immunity from liability under what's called Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act. Now, a great many people agree that the pattern, the anti-conservative bias and the pattern of censorship we're seeing from big tech is concerning. The question of remedy is a more complicated one. What to do about it is a thorny question. It's a thorny legal question. It's a thorny policy question. Nobody, or at least nobody in their right mind, wants to see a government speech police. No one wants to see the federal government regulating what is allowed to be said. But there are at least three potential remedies that can be considered either by Congress or the administration or both. The first I mentioned is Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act. That provides a special immunity from liability that big tech enjoys that nobody else gets. The predicate for that immunity from liability is that the social media platforms were understood to be neutral public fora. In other words, they were simply posting what others said. They weren't engaging in their own political advocacy. Now, I will note some commentators have misunderstood the argument I'm making in this, in that they've suggested that I'm arguing that Section 230 requires in its statutory text that big tech companies be neutral public fora. That's not my argument. My argument is that big tech made effectively a bargain with Congress and a bargain with the American people. We'll be neutral, we'll be fair, we won't be biased, and in exchange for that, we'll receive what is effectively a federal subsidy of immunity for liability. If big tech wants to be partisan political speakers, it has that right. But it has no entitlement to a special immunity from liability under Section 230 that the New York Times doesn't enjoy, that the Washington Post doesn't enjoy, that nobody else enjoys other than big tech. The second potential avenue for remedy is the antitrust laws. Applying the antitrust laws in this area is complicated. But by almost any measure, the giant tech companies today are larger and more powerful than Standard Oil was when it was broken up. They're larger and more powerful than AT&T was when it was broken up. And if we have tech companies using the powers of monopoly to censor political speech, I think that raises real antitrust issues. The third potential avenue of remedy is under principles of fraud. Most users of Facebook or Twitter or Google, when they use those services, they don't envision that they're participating in a biased forum. They believe that when they speak, the people who've chosen to follow them will hear what they say. And there are distressing pieces of evidence that suggest that's not the case. Now, I will note, much of the argument in this topic is anecdotal. It's based on one example or another example. There's a reason for that, because we have no data. There is no transparency. Nobody knows how many speakers Twitter is blocking, how many speakers Facebook is blocking. Nobody knows what the raw data is in terms of bias. So one of the first things that this hearing seeks to accomplish is simply move us towards transparency, to understand what the facts are. Argument by anecdote is less than satisfying, but it is all we are left with as long as big tech remains a black box that simply says, trust us. Senator Hirano.
Thank you. I join the chairman in welcoming our witnesses this afternoon. There are many areas where the Senate should be conducting oversight of the tech industry. Baseless allegations of anti-conservative bias is not one of them. We still need a full accounting of the ways that Russia used Facebook and other forms of social media to influence the 2016 election. YouTube is full of misleading and outright false information about vaccines that has put the public at risk. The alt-right continues to use Twitter to organize and spread hate. Each of the companies that will be testifying here this morning failed to contain the spread of the video of the mosque shootings in New Zealand, videos that can still be found on these platforms. These are just a few of the real and serious issues we could investigate about the tech industry. Yet here we are, discussing claims of anti-conservative bias that have been disproven time and again. One of our witnesses, Professor Francesca Tripodi, studies partisanship on social media and finds that conservative perspectives abound on Facebook, Google, and Twitter. She describes claims of anti-conservative bias as nothing more than a mix of anecdotal evidence, which the chairman has acknowledged, and a failure to understand the company's algorithms and content moderation practices. Professor Tripodi's conclusions are consistent with those of media watchdog, Media Matters, and others that anti-conservative bias simply does not exist. So why are we here? If anti-conservative bias by the tech industry has been proven false, why in the world are we holding a hearing on it in the United States Senate? The answer is simple, people. It's politics. For decades, Republicans have bashed the supposedly liberal mainstream media in an effort to work the refs and gain more favorable coverage. And the strategy has worked. Research shows that major news outlets have overcompensated for their perceived liberal bias by treating Democrats more harshly than Republicans. For example, the Harvard Kennedy School's Shorenstein Center on Media, Politics, and Public Policy found that Hillary Clinton received a larger share of negative news coverage over the course of the 2016 election than Donald Trump did. Now that 2/3 of Americans get their news from social media, Republicans have a new boogeyman to target, big tech. And just like traditional media, tech companies have responded to false claims of bias by trying to placate the right. In June 2016, Facebook's chief operating officer, Sheryl Sandberg, went to the conservative American Enterprise Institute to announce that Facebook would offer political bias training to its employees. Over the past 2 years, Facebook and Twitter have dispatched emissaries to meet with Republican leaders and conservative commentators behind closed doors. Last summer, Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey seemingly apologized in response to baseless claims that Twitter engaged in so-called shadow banning of conservatives, tweeting, "We have a lot more work to do to earn people's trust on how we work. We simply cannot allow the Republican Party to harass tech companies into weakening content moderation policies that already fail to remove hateful, dangerous, and misleading content." Anyone who frequents social media knows that the online world can be a pretty vile place. Unfortunately, few people know this better than another one of our witnesses, Robbie Parker. Robbie is the father of Emily Parker, one of the 20 children and 6 adults murdered at Sandy Hook Elementary School in December of 2012. After suffering through this terrible tragedy, Robbie and his family have spent the past 6+ years dealing with online harassment from conspiracy theorists who claim the shooting was a hoax. Think about that. Robbie had his daughter tragically taken from him. While he struggled to cope with that loss, he had to deal with people telling him that his daughter didn't die, that he was a crisis actor paid to stage a shooting as a way for the government to confiscate people's guns. To this day, if you Google Robbie's name, you are presented with links to conspiracy sites. And just yesterday, I Googled Robbie Parker, and this is what I got back. 2 of the 3 videos claim the Sandy Hook was a hoax. And the very first web page returned is called, quote, "If Sandy Hook was not a hoax, how do you explain the Robbie Parker video?" End quote. This is over 6 years since the shooting at Sandy Hook Elementary School. And these lies are still being featured by Google. I had hoped to discuss this and other concerns I have with Google during today's hearing. Unfortunately, the chairman rejected Google's proposed witness and wouldn't even let him attend at my invitation. So there is an empty seat over there at the witness table. This is important because Robbie is an example of the real-world harm that comes with content posted on the internet. He is an example of why strong content moderation is necessary. Now, I understand that some conservatives have had content removed based on Facebook, Google's, and Twitter's content moderation policies. But let's be clear, it's not because they're conservative. After all, Google and Facebook are 2 of the biggest and most profitable companies on the planet, acknowledged by the chair too. They did not reach this level of success by turning away a portion of their potential customers. If conservatives have had their content removed, maybe they should look at the content that they're posting. Maybe they shouldn't post lies about Planned Parenthood selling baby body parts. Maybe they shouldn't inflame religious tensions by misrepresenting the tenets of one of the world's major religions. Or maybe they shouldn't use their platform to harass and spread lies about a dad who lost his little girl in the most tragic way possible. I hope that going forward, this subcommittee will focus on the real issues facing America, like hate speech, like voter suppression, like looking into the emoluments clause. That's what I'd like this committee to pursue, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Hirono. And now, to address the question of whether or not bias and censorship exists, we have a member of this committee who indeed has faced it firsthand, Senator Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I think it is fair to say I've had a couple of brushes with social media companies in the past couple of years. And I will also say it is indeed a pleasure and an honor to live in a country that values free speech. We see this as a cherished constitutional right. In authoritarian countries like Russia or China, there is no such thing as free speech. And if you were to voice any form of dissent or criticism, then, surprise, a Communist Party official shows up on your doorstep and they take you to prison. Fortunately, we live in America. I will tell you that I do think it's time for tech companies like Google and Facebook to start embracing the spirit of the First Amendment, not just for their own employees, but for all the Americans who use their platforms. What value is there in platforms that are more concerned with inserting their bias than providing a neutral place for people to discuss their ideas? Companies like Facebook and Google, which have transformed society in revolutionary ways, need to recognize that with that power comes great responsibility. Facebook is a corporation, not a state actor. Yet Facebook runs a forum for debate like the town public square, except there is no mayor or sheriff that would be allowed to police conversation the way that Facebook censors conversation online. Last June, I published an op-ed urging Silicon Valley companies to respect a diversity of opinions and to address allegations of conservative bias on their platforms. If they truly were impartial actors encountering a series of unfortunate events, lay their case out for the American public. Lay out your case. My suggestions really didn't go over very well in the Silicon Valley. Little has changed since then. Earlier this month, Google bent the knee to employee demands to shut down its external AI ethics board because, heaven forbid, a woman serving on the committee was the president of a respected conservative think tank. For these employees in Silicon Valley, conservative credentials are absolutely a scarlet letter. Unfortunately, Facebook is no different. By one count, Facebook had nearly 24 scandals over privacy violations in 2018 alone. At some point, Facebook will have to atone for these sins. Clearly, GDPR isn't causing the company much pain. If anything, it appears to have solidified their dominance in the marketplace, while increasing barriers to entry for potential competitors. I think we should be clear that at least here in the United States Senate, Mark Zuckerberg's pivot to privacy isn't fooling anybody. This sudden support for European-style privacy protections is disingenuous. By allowing the Europeans to force their hand when it comes to addressing content, including political speech, Facebook can cloak itself in altruistic cloth while conveniently evading any constitutional arguments back at home. In order to arrive at consensus on privacy, data security, and net neutrality issues, we're maintaining a bipartisan posture, both on the Commerce and Judiciary Committees. This week, Senator Klobuchar and I sent a letter to the FTC urging stronger action for bad actors in the tech sector. Americans are rightly concerned about who owns their virtual you. They want to be certain that their privacy is protected both in the physical and the virtual space. The FTC has a responsibility to hold tech companies accountable for securing their platforms. Big tech is accustomed to living in a bubble with the same comfortable and progressive ideas. But let me tell you right now, that bubble is bursting. When I voiced my concerns about infringements on our freedom of speech, a senior Google search engineer called me a terrorist. I was a congressman when I voiced my concerns in 2018, and I sit before you now as a senator and a member of this panel. No matter what, I will continue to protect the right of Americans to engage in free speech, even speech I disagree with. I wish big tech would show the same respect. Whether Californians like it or not, they are going to need to work with us and negotiate with us to see how we can bring meaningful privacy reforms to the people of the United States of America. I yield back.
Thank you, Senator Blackburn. We'll now introduce each of the two witnesses on our first panel. The first witness is Carlos Monge, Jr., who is Twitter's Director of Policy and Philanthropy for the United States and Canada. Before joining Twitter, Mr. Monge spent over a decade in public service, including multiple senior levels in the Obama administration. From 2014 through 2016, he served in the U.S. Department of Transportation, rising to acting Undersecretary and Assistant Secretary for Transportation Policy, where he oversaw the implementation of surface transportation programs. Prior to joining the Department of Transportation, Mr. Monge served for 3 years in the White House Domestic Policy Council, where he oversaw all aspects of policy, message, and event development across a wide spectrum of domestic policy issues. Mr. Monge is from New Orleans, a first-generation American, and a graduate of Harvard College. The second witness is Neil Potts. Neil Potts is the Public Policy Director at Facebook, where he currently leads the content policy and strategic response teams. He oversees the development and implementation of Facebook's community standards, the rules for what types of content are allowed on the platform. Mr. Potts previously spent a decade in Washington, D.C. as a public policy and legislative affairs attorney, including 5 years at the Truman National Security Project. He is a veteran of the United States Marine Corps, having served 5 years as an intelligence officer after graduating with a degree in mathematics from the United States Naval Academy, and he's a graduate at the University of Virginia School of Law. Welcome to you both. I would ask that you stand, raise your right hand, and be sworn in. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give before this committee will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Mr. Monge, you may go first.
Thank you, sir. Chairman Cruz, Ranking Member Hirono, members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to appear today. Twitter is an American company, and Twitter's purpose is to serve the public conversation. We welcome perspectives and insights from diverse sources and embrace being a platform where the open and free exchange of ideas can occur. We put the people who use our service first in every step we take. We have rules in place that are designed to ensure the safety and security of the people who come to our service. Safety and free expression go hand in hand, both online and in the real world. If people don't feel safe to speak, they very often won't. These two guideposts, free expression for all perspectives and rules of the road to promote safety, are not only in our users' interest, but also paramount to sustaining our business. Let me be clear about an important and foundational fact. Twitter does not use political viewpoints, perspectives, or party affiliation to make any decisions, whether related to automatically ranking content or how we enforce our rules. Every day, elected representatives use Twitter to communicate with their constituents, with their peers, and international counterparts. In the United States, every single senator, governor, and House member has a Twitter account. Millions of people around the globe take to Twitter to engage in conversations on a wide range of issues. The notion that we would silence any political perspective is antithetical to our commitment to free expression. There has never been a time in history when individuals have had more tools to reach a broad audience, and Twitter continues to be one of the most popular platforms for conservative voices. In preparation for this hearing and to better inform the members of the subcommittee, our data scientists analyzed tweets sent by all members of the House and Senate for a 5-week period, from February to March of this year. After controlling for factors like number of followers, we observed that there is no statistically significant difference between the number of times a tweet by a Democrat is viewed versus a tweet by a Republican. Their performance is the same because the Twitter platform does not take sides. Let me address a few high-profile issues that have led some to question our impartiality. In July of last year, we acknowledged that some accounts, including those of Republicans and Democrats, were not being auto-suggested when people were searching for a specific name. This means that you had to hit enter before seeing them in the search results. This issue impacted 600,000 accounts across the globe, the vast majority of which were not political, and however, 10 accounts of Republican members of Congress were affected. The auto-suggest issue happened because Twitter had tweaked a behavioral-based algorithm designed to reduce abuse. Specifically, we were downranking content if a significant number of an account's followers had histories of breaking our rules. Once we identified this issue, we promptly resolved it within 24 hours. And it is important to note that because Twitter is so transparent, follower counts of those members of Congress spiked following the publicity on the issue. I would like to discuss another recent issue, the account @unplannedmovie. This account was caught in our automated systems used to detect ban evasion. Ban evasion technology is an important tool to reduce the number of repeat offenders on our platform. Specifically, the person who created the movie's account was previously suspended for breaking our rules. We reinstated @unplannedmovie as soon as it was brought to our attention that the account was not being used for similar violative activity. And the hashtag #unplannedmovie became a trending topic on Twitter. Many other accusations of bias stem from issues about how our platform organizes information and often very serious violations of our terms of service, which are not always visible to the public. I explain these in greater detail in my written testimony. Every day, we see hundreds of millions of tweets and thousands of violations of our policies. We try to get each one of those right, but we do make mistakes on all sides of the political spectrum and all around the world. We will consistently work to get better and to be more transparent about our efforts. Senator Blackburn, we've apologized to your Senate office and to the campaign, but on behalf of Twitter, I apologize again. We made the wrong call. We developed policies governing advertisements that run on Twitter that try to balance allowing our advertisers to promote messages with protecting individuals who did not ask to see that ad. I'm sorry. Twitter wouldn't be Twitter if everyone had the same viewpoint. We strive to balance safety and freedom of expression every day. We believe strongly in being impartial, and we endeavor to enforce our rules dispassionately. We work extremely hard to make sure our algorithms are fair and aim to be transparent and fix issues when we make mistakes in order to maintain the trust of our users, advertisers, and the general public. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Mr. Potts.
Thank you, Chairman. Chairman Cruz, Ranking Member Hirono, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. My name is Neil Potts, and I'm a director at Facebook with oversight of our community standards. Those are the rules which allow which types of content we have on the platform. I'm a graduate of the United States Naval Academy and the University of Virginia School of Law. Prior to joining Facebook, I served as a ground intelligence officer in the United States Marine Corps, where I was deployed in support of Operation Iraqi Freedom and Enduring Freedom. Facebook's mission is to give people the power to build community and to bring the world closer together. More than 2 billion people come to our platform every month to connect with family, to connect with friends, to find out what's going on in their world, to build their businesses, to volunteer or donate to organizations they care about, and to help those in need. Our users share billions of pictures, stories, and videos about their lives and their beliefs every single day. It's this diversity of viewpoints, expression, and experiences that highlights much of what is good about Facebook, but can also mean that it's tough to make decisions about what should be and should not be allowed on the platform. I would like to make one point clear. Facebook does not favor one political viewpoint over another, and we do not suppress conservative speech. We are committed to encouraging dialogue and the free flow of ideas by designing our products to give people a voice, by implementing standards and to ensure fair and transparent processes for removing content that does not belong on Facebook. We created our community standards to standardize our content removal decisions so they can be applied consistently, fairly, neutrally, to a community that transcends regions, cultures, religions, and languages. And we take that neutrality seriously. Our artificial intelligence algorithms have been designed, and our human content reviewers have been trained to ensure that content is reviewed in a neutral, unbiased way. And we're really focused on what's needed to keep our users safe. Our community standards do not prohibit users from discussing controversial topics or supporting a debated point of view, nor do they favor opinions on one end of the political spectrum or another. Given the vast amount of content we have on our platform, our reviewers have to respond to millions of reports each week from people all over the world. And we don't always get it right. We know that there have been a number of high-profile content removal incidents, and we're taking several steps to respond to those concerns raised by the subcommittee and others. First, we publish a community standards enforcement report twice a year, and that report describes the amount and types of content we have taken action against. We publish comprehensive guidelines to provide more clarity around content moderation decisions. Second, we've solicited external feedback on our content moderation policies from sources across the political spectrum. For example, former Senator Kyle, he is leading a team gathering insights from members of Congress, a number of conservative groups, assessing whether there are any ways which the company is unintentionally biased against conservative points of view. Another example is Laura Murphy. She's a national civil liberties and civil rights leader who is guiding an independent civil rights audit of our platform. Third, we've created an appeals process for content that's been removed from our platform as hate speech. And we're working to extend that process further by creating an independent oversight board of experts on free speech and safety to render binding and transparent decisions on these appeals. Fourth, we've partnered with over 100 groups across the political spectrum. We're continuing to expand that list of outside partner organizations to ensure we receive feedback on our content policies from a diverse set of viewpoints. And finally, we're continuing our work to refine and enhance the quality of our machine learning. The machine learning, which is our first line of defense, the content assessment on our platform. We hope that these improvements and safeguards will help ensure that Facebook remains a platform that enables the broadest spectrum of free expression possible, while still keeping our space welcoming and safe for the entire community. There's a lot more to do, but we're proud of the significant progress we've made over the last few years. Still, we know that people have questions, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here today.
Thank you to both of the witnesses, and I'll note also for the record that originally there was planned to be a third witness from Google, as the ranking member observed. However, Google declined to provide a witness of comparable seniority and responsibility in the company as the other two witnesses here. And so accordingly, this committee will be conducting a separate and subsequent hearing focused directly on Google and the issues of Google's censorship of speech. Gentlemen, let me start with a question that I have asked both of your companies more than once, which is a simple and straightforward question that I'd like to get a simple and straightforward answer to, which is, and let's start with you, Mr. Mange, does Twitter consider itself a neutral public forum?
Twitter strives every day to be an impartial platform where all voices can come and speak.
Mr. Mange, you answered this recently in the House and gave an answer that was a long paragraph, and it didn't answer it. So I'm going to try. I don't actually expect to get an answer because I've asked you this before, but are you able to answer yes or no whether you consider yourself a neutral public forum?
I didn't testify in the House, sir. I'll answer the same way.
Okay, please do that.
Which is that Twitter is an open internet platform where people from all stripes and political affiliations all around the globe come and speak.
Okay, let me help you recently. Let me help you on this. Doris. So recently, the CEO of Twitter, Jack Dorsey, said, quote, "I don't believe that we can afford to take a neutral stance anymore. I don't believe that we should optimize for neutrality." Does this represent the policy of Twitter?
I have not seen that quote, sir.
Do you agree with it?
That is not how he is building the platform and how everybody who comes to Twitter every day. I think it's important to note, sir, that 3/4 of our users are overseas, and that we are a global company that is staffed globally.
All right, Mr. Potts, same question for Facebook. Does Facebook consider itself a neutral public forum?
Thank you, Chairman. I think first and foremost, we consider ourselves a technology company. We are a platform for a diversity of viewpoints, and we moderate those viewpoints under our community standards.
Okay, I'm going to try one more time to get a yes or no, but your company has likewise consistently refused to answer this, so I probably can't. Do you consider yourself a neutral public? You have a choice. You can be yes or no. I'd fine either way.
Now, again, Chairman, we are a technology company. We have a mission to build a community, to bring the world closer together. We try to do that through our community standards to ensure that diverse viewpoints are allowed on the platform.
All right, let's try a second area of inquiry. The ranking member suggested that there is no censorship. And indeed, she said there are just a handful of anecdotes. You know, I will note, among other things, that Senator Blackburn, her announcement video announcing for the United States Senate was pulled down, as Mr. Manji rightly apologized for. But yet these anecdotes all seem to be consistently on one side of the spectrum. So let me ask a question, Mr. Manji. In the year 2018, how many tweets from elected officials did Facebook pull down? I'm sorry, Twitter pull down.
I'd have to get back to you on those specific cases. If I could follow up, though, sir. Every day we see 500 million tweets, and we have to action thousands of accounts. And those happen literally all across the political spectrum and literally all over the globe. 1 in a million happens 500 times a day on Twitter. And if you are looking for data points to support any narrative, you can find it. We do have a number.
Are you aware of even a single Democratic politician who has had a tweet pulled down? I'm not.
I am.
Could you share that, please?
Yes, sir. And I will note that we are as committed to transparency as you have described and have taken a number of steps to improve transparency. We also have to protect the privacy and security of our users, people who didn't ask to be part of the spotlight. But let me follow up on your question, sir.
Although to be fair, if someone's tweeting, they are asking the world to see what they're saying. I mean, that's the essence of a social media post as you're posting it.
That's true, but our actions on those accounts are also matters that are extremely sensitive. But if I could follow up on your specific question, I'm not going to mention specific names in a public forum, but very recent examples. We recently changed our impersonation policy. That allows, if I could, sir, you asked the question. Our impersonation policy that allows third parties to report impersonation, and we had 2 current U.S. sitting senators, a sitting governor, and a sitting state attorney general, all Democrats, who were impacted by that. Second case, advertising transparency. We honored the ideas that were part of the Honest Ads Act and agree with the idea that political advertising should be more transparent. In the process of setting that up, a number of accounts got caught up in that include 3 current Democratic candidates for president and a major national pro-choice group. Somebody mentioned the general data protection regulations out of Europe.
Okay,
the main purpose being, sir, is that these folks didn't put out a press release about it. They called us. We do trainings to all members of Congress.
Well, Mr. Manji, I appreciate your saying you will answer the questions when we provide them in writing. I'd like to get specific answers to the question. Let me pose it to Mr. Potts, and I'll point, Mr. Potts, in 2018, how many posts from elected officials did Facebook pull down?
Chairman, I don't have that figure, but I'm happy to follow up with you at a later time.
Well, I would ask you to, and I would note that when Mr. Zuckerberg testified before this full committee, I submitted that question and a number of other questions in writing to Facebook, and you at the time refused to answer it and the company instead gave legal boilerplate and refused to answer the question. And nobody here knows. We know that Senator Blackburn's post was pulled down. Let me ask a comparable question, because it's not just political, it's also ideological. There have been multiple instances of, in particular, pro-life groups being disfavored. For example, here is a tweet that says, "Abortion is profoundly anti-women," and it's a quote from Mother Teresa. And this tweet was blocked. Now it is fairly remarkable that Mother Teresa is now deemed hate speech. Do either of you agree with the proposition that Mother Teresa is issuing hate speech? Is this hate speech?
If I could take a step back from that. I believe that that account is from the Susan B. Anthony list.
Correct.
And Susan B. Anthony is currently an advertiser in good standing on our platform. Last promoted
Mr. Manji,
tweet from
you're
that-
very good at not answering questions. Is this hate speech?
Every tweet has context behind it, and every decision that's made has
The full
context.
tweet, there's no more context.
I can tell you that we have actioned accounts on both sides of this debate, including tweets by pro-choice groups who have said that everybody who's pro-life is misogynistic. There are many pro-life groups that advertise on our platforms currently in good standing, and advertisers across the board, whether they're selling soap or NFL, sometimes have advertisements that are caught in our systems. And the reason why...
And that is an area we'll be following up as well. So I appreciate your saying there are groups on the pro-choice side that you have blocked, and this committee is going to attempt to understand and quantify if there is a disparate treatment or not. If there's not a disparate treatment, that'll benefit Twitter to show that you're being even-handed. The anecdotes we're aware of are consistently on one side of the aisle. Mr. Potts, do you consider this hate speech? Does Facebook consider this hate speech?
Again, Chairman, I don't believe this was on our site, but looking at that quote right now, the lights are a little bright, so my eyes are trying to zero in, or focus, I should say. That would not be in violation of our policies.
And same question that Mr. Manji was asked is, has Facebook, to your knowledge, ever blocked a post from Planned Parenthood?
I believe that is correct. I believe we have, Senator.
Okay, we would be very interested in learning about that. When I asked Facebook that in writing after Mr. Zuckerberg's hearing, you again refused to answer that question as well. And so the basic data, if you are not engaged in censorship, releasing the data, how many people you're blocking, how many people you're downgrading, and what side of the political aisle or ideological aisle they're on, would go a long way to either clearing it up or to demonstrating there's a persistent pattern of bias. Senator Hirono.
5 minutes?
Senator, you may take the time you
No,
like.
but I see there are all these people, so I don't want to take up their time. Let's try to stick to 5 minutes.
I'll tell you what, when you chair the committee, you can decide on the time.
I hope that day comes soon.
I-
We'll do our best to be really amicable around here. So, Mr. Potts, how many postings are on Facebook every day?
Thank you, Ranking Member. There are over 1 billion postings on Facebook every day. That includes images, text posts, videos, and other types of content.
1 billion. And Twitter, Mr. Manji?
It's Monhe, thank you so much.
You said 500 million
Yes,
tweets
yes,
every
ma'am.
single day. And I think both of you said you're not perfect in your efforts to try and get rid of some of the dangerous, violent, hateful content. I think, did both of you say that?
Yes, ma'am.
And neither one of you is perfect, your companies.
No, ma'am.
Okay. So with 1 billion postings every single day, 500 million every single day, would it be accurate for me to say that I could find all kinds of, in fact, as to one of our other witnesses, I found, just yesterday, all kinds of what I would say totally false allegations about that witness. So I probably could find all kinds of things that are on Facebook right now that, in my view, should be taken down. But I don't expect you all to be perfect. So it's in that context. Let's just make it really plain and clear. Do your platforms discriminate against conservative users? Do your algorithms have something that says, oh, these are the kinds of words that conservatives use, so we're just going to get rid of those postings or tweets?
Ranking Member, our algorithms, our policies, our enforcement, we do not suppress any type of views, whether conservative or liberal.
So you don't have any algorithm that says, here are the kind of words and the areas that they go to, and we're just going to get rid of them. You don't have anything like that.
No, Senator.
What about you?
No, ma'am. Party affiliation, political ideology is never an input.
So do either of your platforms discriminate against conservative content?
Senator, we review our content under our community standards. If it violates our community standards, we apply those community standards evenly, despite political ideology.
So your community standards, by the way, is a little bit different than when you said that you try to ID and remove violent, hateful, or dangerous content. But the community standards are a little bit broader or different than those three
They are,
characteristics?
I'm sorry, thank you, Senator. They are a bit more broad. They do include those, but they cover over 22 sections. We are transparent with our community standards, the same guidelines that our reviewers use to moderate content. Those are available at facebook.com/community standards for the public to review so that the public also knows how to regulate their behavior on the platform.
Does Twitter have something that's akin to Facebook's community standards?
Yes, ma'am. We call them our terms of service, and they're available at help.twitter.com.
Terms of service.
Terms of service.
But you also try to ID and remove violent, hateful, or dangerous content?
That's right. Yes, we have a range of rules.
Does a user's political party affiliation play an application of a company's content moderation policies? In fact, are your users supposed to identify their political affiliations before they use your platforms?
No, ma'am.
How are you even supposed to know what their political affiliations are? Do you? Certainly don't ask for them, right? So, okay, now there are some things that really, you are huge entities. I agree with the chairman on that. So after the tragedy at Sandy Hook Elementary School in 2012, the families didn't even have time to buy their children before conspiracy theories began to spread around the internet claiming that the shooting was all a hoax. I understand that many of the families reached out to each of your companies to remove these lies, but that most of their requests went unanswered. The content was only removed if it included a photo or video protected by copyright. Why did your companies allow these lies on your platforms even after they had been identified by the families? You can start, Mr. Potts.
Thank you, Senator. We now have strong policies to prevent that type of behavior. And my heart goes out to the members here who have a connection to Sandy Hook and other violent tragedies. If someone accuses a victim of a violent tragedy as being a crisis actor or that it never happened, we do remove that content as of today.
You saw my board right there, and it's still on there. I don't know if that's Facebook, though. I don't want to accuse the wrong company.
I believe that is all Google,
Okay.
ma'am.
Who's not here today? Okay, I wish they were here. So why, you say that you now have policies. When did you adopt those policies?
I will have to go back to check to confirm, but it was about a year, or maybe a little over a year ago.
So it took you quite a while after the tragedy 2012. I'd like to have Mr. Mange answer also before we move on.
Thank you, Senator. It is a terrible tragedy. I just met Mr. Parker, and our hearts break for his families and those that lost loved ones. We have also updated our internal abusive behavior policy to make clear that targeting other people with content that denies that violent events happened is against our rules.
When did you update your
It was last year.
policy? So it took both of you quite a long time to get to that. I would ask that, well, now that you have these policies, then I guess I'm hopeful that these kinds of lies against individuals do not get on your platforms. Thank you.
Would Senator Hirono like any additional time?
Thank you. Actually, yes.
Okay.
Google is not here, and so I mentioned in my opening statement that I am disappointed that we don't have a witness from Google. And Google was ready and willing to send its acting director of political and stakeholder outreach, Max Pappas, to testify. You rejected Google's offer. And when my staff asked to invite Mr. Pappas as a minority witness, they were told by your staff that they could not do so because you had decided that no Google witness would be permitted to testify at the hearing. And in fact, Mr. Pappas is at the same level of responsibility as our two other witnesses right now. So I would like to enter into the record. I'd like to ask for unanimous consent to enter into the record the testimony of Mr. Pappas.
Without objection.
Thank you.
Senator Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to both of you for being here. This is an important issue, and I think it's important to remember that anytime we're talking about speech, when someone brings up hate speech, there is a difference, of course, between what could lawfully be prohibited if we were talking about a government prohibition on speech on the one hand, and speech that someone hates on the other hand. I'd like to start with you, Mr. Potts. Can you tell me, Facebook has a different standard for content generated by a user who is not a paid advertiser versus paid advertisements, is that right?
That's correct, Senator. Our content policies apply to all user-generated content. That's the community standards. That is the baseline. For advertisers, there are more stringent standards that sit on top of those policies.
And the reason for that is you're being paid for that content and you feel a responsibility to moderate that content to a greater degree. Is that roughly accurate? Okay. Are you familiar with an instance a few months ago in which Susan B. Anthony list, a topic that came up in a slightly different context a few minutes ago, ran a couple of ads dealing with two prematurely born babies who survived, Charlotte Ryan and Micah Pickering?
Yes, Senator, I'm definitely familiar with the Micah Pickering example, maybe a little less so with the Charlotte Ryan.
Okay, so let's go with the Micah Pickering example. I met Micah Pickering. He's a healthy, happy little boy now. His images were featured in an advertisement purchased by the Susan B. Anthony list in order to promote life, in order to promote the idea that children, even children born very prematurely, in the range of 20 to 22 gestational weeks, can still survive and go on to live as happy, healthy human beings. And as I recall, that advertisement was taken down by Facebook. Is that?
That's correct, and I believe that we reinstated that advertisement within 24 hours.
Okay. At the time, what was Facebook's explanation for why it was taken down?
I think it violated one of our advertising policies.
Which policy would that have been?
I believe it was around, we have a policy around somewhat graphic content, and someone viewed that to be graphic. I think the exact name is the sensationalism policy. Senator.
Okay. Graphic content, perhaps because it involved a medical procedure, or perhaps because it depicted an infant in a position in which the infant had tubes going into it or something like that?
It is the medical procedure.
Okay. The medical procedure going on, that's depicted, and that's regarded as graphic. Does your policy work even-handedly, such that regardless of whether we're talking about pro-life versus pro-choice, what if the same image were depicted in a slightly different context, not advertising perhaps a pro-choice cause, but just another cause unrelated to pro-life? For example, what if that same image of Micah Pickering, or series of images, had been used in the context of an advertisement designed to focus on the dangers associated with drug abuse by a mother carrying a child?
Thank you, Senator. If it was the same picture, I'm assuming that the same policy would have been applied, hopefully the same way. We would like consistency there. As you know, that if there are different pictures, that would perhaps force either the automation and or the reviewer to come to a different decision. So if a child is viewed that is 20 weeks maybe versus 24 weeks, I know that's very narrow. For the reviewer, it may be different, but if the
Well, surely the reviewer is not going to be able to differentiate between 22 and 24 weeks. Surely that's not going to make the distinction.
I don't want to try to get too nuanced there, but depending on if the view was that this was too graphic, and I think because of the image which I recall, that decision was made, although it was made incorrectly, to disallow the ad.
But in fact, Mr. Potts, this is not hypothetical, is it? I mean, this has happened. We did, in fact, see the Susan B. Anthony list advertisement taken down, while we had corresponding images used in advertisements that have not been taken down. Isn't that right?
We have, but again, I don't think we've had the same image used.
Okay.
That's what
Perhaps not the same image, but an image of an infant in a comparably vulnerable position.
And I think I think it all turns on the word comparably. I think there were similar images, but not the same image, so it makes the comparison a bit more difficult. But if they were the same image, I would expect them to have both been taken down by that same reviewer with a misapplication of our policies.
And what explanation can you provide for me as to why one might have been taken down and the other not? Regardless of whether you say they should have been consistent with Facebook's policy, what might account for why they might receive differential treatment?
Senator, I would like to say that, as we mentioned, we review billions of posts and other pieces of content. Sometimes we make mistakes. In this case of this reviewer that reviewed that piece of content with Micah, he removed it incorrectly, or he or she removed it incorrectly. If that's the case, I would expect that reviewer to make the same mistake, regardless of who shared that image. Now, if we take a different image run by the SBA, run by anyone, and place it there, and if that person were to allow it, I assume that they would allow it across the board as well. I don't know if I'm doing a great job of explaining that, but
No, I think I understand what you're suggesting, and I understand and appreciate the point. Could it not also have to do with other factors, including possibly who is more likely to complain about the Susan B. Anthony image? Who is more likely to work at Facebook? Could that have something to do with it?
I don't believe so, Senator. I think to a question of whether someone would try to influence a decision with their bias, that's something that we really try to exclude, to bring out of the process, to check any type of bias at the door. We have a very strong managing bias curriculum within the company. It's a rigorous program. I've never been in a position where I've written a policy or made an enforcement decision or sat with a product team building an engineering product where someone asked anyone's political affiliation or whether they were pro-life or pro-choice. Again, this one seems like a mistake that I would expect it to have been made no matter who posted it.
Okay. The chair has politely and gently reminded me that I'm over my time limit. I'm going to want to get back to this later and got to go cast a vote. I do think it's worth mentioning here that it is something I consider a mathematical impossibility that there isn't a subjective component to this that involves who is reviewing it. You can't entirely mechanize this. You can't program it into an AI feature to monitor this. It seems to me mathematically impossible to suggest that there isn't some subjective judgment calling going on, and that some of that might not be impacted by who works there. Now, Facebook is a private company. I differ from some of my colleagues in the approach I take to this. I don't view you as a public utility. I don't view you as being owned by the government. But some of my colleagues see it differently, and so it's why it's important for us to flag this. As long as some of my colleagues see it that way, I think this is something that your company ought to focus on and ought to try to work to resolve. We'll get back to that later. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And before I get to my questions, and we do have a vote on the board, Mr. Manji, you mentioned the GDPR. Let me just say privacy, as we know it, as the world knows it today, primarily is something the U.S. has led the way in creating privacy law. And then when you see this European style privacy that is GDPR, you know that Europe doesn't have the most innovative and dynamic economy, and that the major players in this market are going to be U.S. companies, and needing to have a privacy standard, one set of rules for the entire ecosystem is the reason I've reintroduced the Browser Act today, so that we can do that. Let me just touching on content for a second, and we all, I think, have hoped that you would have a diversity of opinion in your platforms and that it would be a town square. And I know that Facebook has a 27-page memo on censorship. And we would hope that while you are rooting out violence and terrorist propaganda and keeping that off your pages, that you also are having your reviewers and your community that sets those standards, and those that live and work there in California aware that free speech requires that they be respectful of speech with which they do not agree. And we would hope that you all would go back to California focused on exercising that with that respect to the law and respect to individuals. I've got a few questions. Mr. Potts, should Facebook promote spirited debate on all sides of the political spectrum? And we'll do these as yes or no.
Thank you, Senator. Yes, we allow spirited
Okay.
debate on all
Mr.
slides.
Manji, same question.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Mr. Potts, should Facebook allow ads urging that we save sea turtles or baby seals?
I believe that would be fine.
Okay. Mr. Manji, should Twitter allow ads that denounce Planned Parenthood for selling baby body parts?
Ma'am, thank you for that question, and I'd like to again
Yes or no?
apologize for you.
Yeah.
Every ad is judged
Yes or
within
no is
context,
good.
and we made a mistake on your ad, and I apologize.
Okay. Mr. Manji, should Twitter allow ads from Starbucks and Patagonia?
If they follow our terms of service.
And Mr. Potts, should Facebook allow ads from Chick-fil-A and Hobby Lobby?
If they follow our ads policies.
Okay. And who sets those policies?
There are teammates of mine. We have separate teams that work on ads policies.
Are they
specifically.
subjective or objective?
They are meant to be objective, Senator.
They're meant to be objective. Do people
They-
bring
they are-
their
I-
attitudes to work with them? Their
I-
political attitudes to work with them?
I was incorrect in my statement. They are objective, and we try to strive for
Okay,
people not to
Mr.
bring
Manji,
that.
should Twitter equally promote Democrats and Republicans in search rankings?
Yes, and we strive to.
Mr. Potts, same question.
I'm sorry, Senator.
Should you equally promote Democrats and Republicans in the search rankings? Okay.
Yes, Senator.
And Mr. Potts, should Facebook equally promote articles from all news sources, whether they're from the Wall Street Journal or the Washington Post?
For those two, yes, Senator.
Okay. We've got a presidential year coming up in 2020, so Mr. Manji, please tell me what Twitter is doing to prepare its platform for censorship-free debate.
Thank you so much, Senator. People come to Twitter to figure out what's going on in the world, and never is that more important than during elections. We spent a great amount of time in the lead up to the midterm elections, which were the most tweeted about midterm elections in history. We dramatically improved our ability to find efforts at disinformation, improved our partnerships with all the major parties, with the government and with NGOs to figure out vectors of threats, and we had what we believe was an incredibly clean election. And as the world turns, there are additional elections in the EU, in Japan, in India, in Israel yesterday. And we're going to continue to try to improve our systems, to find disinformation, to make sure that there's greater context about who's speaking.
Now, I know Facebook has hired a news director. Have you all hired a news director?
We are structured differently than Facebook. We do, as a platform, we are running towards news and work with news publishers of all sorts to make sure that they can get their products out on our platform.
Okay, and Mr. Potts, Facebook's plan, their strategy for 2020?
Thank you, Senator. We've hired over 30,000 people to focus on safety and security. We've made significant investments in what we call our election integrity. We have full-time standing teams that are now focused on many of the elections going on in the world, whether it be the EU, India, Israel, as we mentioned yesterday, but definitely focused on 2020 within the United States to ensure that we are out in front to prevent any abuse that could occur on the platform.
Thank you. At this point, I'm going to have the committee stand in recess. As we are in the middle of the vote, I need to get to the floor, and the chairman will return, and we will continue questions with the first panel.